Hello and welcome. My name is Jim Minnick, and I am a member of the evangelization team here at Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Morton, Pennsylvania. On behalf of our pastor, Father James Gerner, and our parochial vicar, Father Kwan, I am really happy to welcome you tonight to the first of two special presentations by a special guest speaker, Roy Schoeman. Roy is a noted author, speaker, and a former Jewish Harvard professor. Roy has written two best-selling books by Ignatius Press, Salvation is from the Jews, The Role of Judaism in Salvation History, and Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews Find the Sweetness of Christ. Roy has also taught theology at Ave Maria University, Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and he also has his own weekly radio show on Radio Maria. Roy has appeared on many other Catholic television stations and radio programs, and he does retreats all around the world. And tonight we're in for a treat. Roy is going to be sharing with us his amazing journey from Judaism to atheism to Catholicism. And part of that journey is a truly supernatural and beautiful experience that he had with Christ. And if that wasn't enough, a little bit later, he has another beautiful encounter, supernatural encounter with Mary. And all this happened before Roy even knew anything about Christianity or Catholicism. And tomorrow night, Roy's going to be giving us a really truly unique and rich perspective on two of the major events in our faith that we'll be celebrating this week. Roy's going to be looking at Jesus's Last Supper, his Seder meal with the apostles, which for many of us Catholics is what we consider our first Catholic Mass. And then he's also going to be looking at the crucifixion, God's perfect plan for salvation. And as Roy puts it, it was the event that ushered in the transformation of Judaism to Catholicism. Now, before I pass it over to Roy, I just wanted to say that either at the top or the bottom of your screen, there should be a link that shows question and answers. If at any point during tonight's talk you have a question you'd like to ask Roy, please click on the link and type in the question and send it. And I and my colleague, Sunda Durkis, will be compiling those Q's and A's, and Roy's going to be leaving time at the end of his presentation to answer those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to, Roy, hand it over to you, and you can certainly unmute yourself, and your video should be on.
Well, I think I'm unmuted, but the Zoom says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay. Hold on there, Roy. Let me just. All right.
I'll try again. Yes, there we
There
are.
you go.
Okay, good.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It's a complicated world. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks for to all of you guys, girls, women, men out there who came to the talk, came to the mission, whatever. Once I get started, I tend to just get on a roll and lose track of things. So before I get started, let me put in a little commercial for tomorrow night, because I'll forget as soon as I get started, which is it's Palm Sunday, right? It's the beginning of Holy Week. It's beginning of the holiest week of the year, and a week that is the centerpiece of salvation history. And we know what happened this week. Jesus went to the temple. He got betrayed by Judas. He had the Last Supper. He got crucified on Friday. He descended to the dead. He resurrected on Sunday. that's the Catholic chronology. It's the correct chronology, of course. But it also happened to take place on Passover. In fact, literally today, is the first day of Passover, and that's not a coincidence. So the center structure of tomorrow night's talk will be, why did Jesus have to be crucified on Passover? How did that fit into divine providence? Why did the first Catholic Mass, which was the Last Supper, was the first time Jesus confected the Eucharist, it's the first time anyone confected the Eucharist. Why was the Last Supper chosen by divine providence, by God, to take place in the context of a Passover Seder? Why does all of this make sense? And why is it the perfect illustration of the fact that Judaism and the Catholic Church are not two independent religions? They are two phases of the same plan for salvation: a preparation phase, which we know of as Judaism, and a fulfillment, realization phase, which we know of as the Catholic Church and her sacraments. And so the preparatory phase, phase one, you could say, was transformed into phase two with the death of Christ, with the life and death of Christ. And the absolute pivot point was the Last Supper, which was at one and the same time a sacramental Jewish Passover Seder and the first sacramental Catholic Mass. None of this is coincidence. And when you unpack that mystery, you see the unity between Judaism and the Catholic Church, and the transformation of Judaism into the Catholic Church, and the meaning of Judaism, all of the meaning of Judaism actually lying in its relationship to its fulfillment in the Catholic Church, including, by the way, why it's interesting to read the Old Testament at all, and is not just a bunch of stories of long dead Jews, but how it's all part of a Catholic salvation history. Catholic salvation history just means true salvation history, by the way. Anyway, I hope I haven't tread on too many toes, but that's tomorrow night's talk. Tonight's talk is, what is a nice Jewish boy like me doing in a place like this, so to speak. So I'll just start with that. And as the host also mentioned, I will leave guaranteed at least probably a half an hour for questions and answers after I stop talking. So there's obviously a system for doing that, for submitting questions. So anyway, so I'll just launch in. As I hope I can, I hope you're not anonymous, Jim, right? I'm allowed to use your name.
Yes, absolutely.
So as Jim said, I was, he didn't actually say, but he referenced that I was a Jewish Harvard professor, and therefore by implication, I was born and raised Jewish. I was born and raised Jewish outside of New York City, actually in northern Jersey. How can I start? My parents were both German Jewish Holocaust refugees. They were both born and raised in Germany. My father left Germany as soon as Hitler came to power. He read the writing on the wall, so to speak, and he was a young man. And he left when Jews were still allowed to leave, although they weren't allowed to bring anything with them. And he made it to New York and got out of the brouhaha. My mother's family was less fortunate. They fled to France, to Paris. That didn't last very long. And of course, much of France fell under the Third Reich. Another way one could say all of France fell under the Third Reich. But anyway, in any case, she was in Paris. Paris was under the Nazis. She tried to smuggle herself into Free France, and she got caught by the Gestapo and actually put on a train, arrested to be put on a train to the concentration camps. But she managed to escape, made it to the United States, where my parents met and married. And I grew up began growing up in the 50s, immediately after really World War II. And it was an entirely Jewish world we lived in. My parents were both seriously Jewish. I was seriously Jewish. But the whole world we were in was Jewish. In fact, the town that we lived in northern Jersey was the only town in the area that allowed Jews to buy houses. There was much more enforced separation in those days between the Jewish and the non-Jewish community. And all basically, as I said, the world we lived in was Jewish. And I went to Jewish religious education all the way from the beginning of school, first grade, until I left for university, alongside secular education. The summer between high school and college, in fact, in my late high school years, I became a disciple, a follower of a Hasidic rabbi, the Hasids. If you're from Philadelphia, you probably know these images. The Hasids with the long ear curls and the fur hats and the long black cloaks and so forth. And I became the disciple of a Hasidic rabbi actually in Israel, and lived and traveled with him in Israel for that summer. I had a tremendous love of God and thirst for God. And I thought that Judaism was the real place where God lived, so to speak. And I even considered not going back to the United States at the end of that summer, but entering the closest thing Judaism has to religious life, which would be a life of prayer and study in a yeshiva in Jerusalem. But I didn't. I went back to the United States. I began university, which is MIT, which of course is technology and science and engineering. And that's where I lost my faith, my Jewish faith, or my belief in God even, under the influence of the anything but scientific, but pseudoscientific view that religion is just a superstition that man came up with until he came up with science to give him the real answers to all of the mysteries of life. And any question that science can't answer now, it will be able to answer in 5 years. And they pass that off as science. That's really an injustice, because that's not the scientific approach at all. The essence of science is you look at the evidence, you form a theory that can explain the evidence. If it's able to explain the evidence, you can keep to that theory. But if it can't, you have to throw it out and find another theory that can explain the evidence. In fact, the materialism reflected by that MIT education can't explain a whole mountain of evidence. In fact, a mountain of evidence, which the Catholic Church does a very good job of explaining. And I can't spend too much time on that, but we know, most of us, I hope, know of probably, if you stop to think about it, dozens of physically verifiable facts, events, which disprove materialism, that disprove atheism, and that support the truths of the Catholic faith. For instance, I hope that we all know about the miracle of the sun at Fatima, which is seen by 80,000 to 100,000 witnesses, including skeptics, including atheists, including communists. Portugal was under a communist government at that time. One of the reasons the kids got so much persecution is because the government didn't want people to believe in God. We have the medical miracles at Lourdes, hundreds of them that have been fully documented, and tens of thousands of them that have taken place. And to be approved as a medical miracle at Lourdes, there has to be physical proof of the condition before the healing, a total and complete and permanent healing that happens instantaneously, and that has no natural explanation, and so forth. And the doctors on the medical panel are intentionally not allowed to be, I believe, more than 1/3 of them Catholics, so that no one can accuse the medical board at Lourdes of being biased. And yet there are hundreds that have passed all of the rigmarole tests to be approved of as totally inexplicable miracles. And as Catholics, we have the particular privilege of having Eucharistic miracles. And one could say, oh, yes, well, this was reported as happening in, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, and people would believe anything in those days. But there was actually a Eucharistic miracle in Buenos Aires in, I believe, 1999, under then Bishop Bergoglio, who we now know as Pope Francis, in which the consecrated host turned into human flesh and blood, which was then examined by forensic scientists, put under electron microscopes and so forth, without the scientists being told where it came from. And they established without any doubt, and with all of the normal scientific evidence, that it was human muscle tissue, I believe even of a man who died in great agony. And similarly, there was one in 2007 in Poland, subjected to the same kind of scientific examination, with no materialistic explanation whatsoever, with, again, the forensic scientists identifying it correctly. And I believe in that one, It's a little even more mysterious in a way because the host, part of the host, maintained the physical properties of the host, the wafer, and the rest of the host took on the physical properties of human muscle tissue and blood. And the cellular structure morphs from one to the other without any interruption at all. Anyway, there's plenty of scientific proof that says, excuse me, we're right and they're wrong. But that's not the point of the talk. But it's really important because we're living, I'm not allowed to get political in any case, and certainly tonight's not the night to get political, but we're living in a world of essentially like propaganda that borders on brainwashing. And part of that brainwashing is you can be Catholic if you want, but it means checking your mind at the door, because actually, you know, you have to be irresponsible to believe what the Catholic Church teaches. And if you want to be intelligent and responsible, you have to believe what CNN teaches, you know, and you have to believe in, if not atheism, at least an amorphous kind of nothing spirituality in which all religions are equally false and equally true. It's very embarrassing. This is your problem more than mine because most of you are cradle Catholics, but it's very embarrassing because you're in the position of actually having the truth and being right and everyone else being wrong. So keep that to keep that to yourselves. Bring it up only in the right circumstances. It's an uncomfortable situation to be in, but it's the situation that, for better or for worse, we're in, and it's actually for better. Anyway, if I don't get on to my witness testimony, I'll never end. So I lost my belief in God at MIT. I'm going to try to play with this a minute. Forgive me, but I'm going to change. Oh, that's interesting. Never mind. I'm not a really good Zoom person, so I'll just have to. It's okay. Fine. So anyway, I lost my belief in God at MIT. By the time I left there, I thought, in good conscience, one can't believe in God. So I was essentially atheist when I left. And after a few years of working in science, I went on to Harvard Business School. And I did well enough there that I was invited back to join the faculty. So I found myself as a newly minted professor of marketing at Harvard Business School at the ripe old age of 29. That's really where my witness testimony begins. That's when the bottom fell out of my world. Because all my life, since I was a small child, I felt there has to be a real meaning and purpose to life. Someday when I'm older, I'll come into the real meaning and purpose to life, which I thought would come from entering into a personal relationship with God, which I really thought would happen seriously at my bar mitzvah, which is like the Catholic confirmation. The child becomes an adult in the eyes of the religion, in the eyes of God. And I thought that's when God would introduce himself to me at my bar mitzvah ceremony. And when that didn't happen, my bar mitzvah was actually one of the saddest days of my childhood. But then pretty soon I decided the real meaning and purpose of life would come from when I got a driver's license, or when I left home, or if I got into MIT, or when I began my career, or if I got into Harvard Business School, and so forth. So I had kind of externalized the idea of a real meaning to life. But here I was already more successful in my secular career than I had ever expected to be, being a professor at Harvard Business School. But the problem was at this point was that life still had no meaning. But now, for the first time, there was nothing else I could imagine might give my life meaning in the future. I wasn't about to be more successful than that, and so forth. So, in fact, I fell into the deepest despair of my life at that point. And it was in that I had long since lost any hope of believing in God. And in that state, I was walking in nature early one morning, and I received this spectacular grace that from one moment to next, I was just walking along, lost in my thoughts, when from one moment to the next, the curtain between the physical world and the spiritual world disappeared. I saw myself looking into the spiritual world. And most importantly, I found myself in the presence of God in a very intimate state of communion and communication with God. and seeing my life as though I had died and I was looking back over my life in the presence of God. And I saw, in an instant, I saw how I would feel about everything after I died. I understood what everything would look like to me, so to speak, after I died. I saw that my two greatest regrets after I died would be, number one, all of the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was held in an ocean of love, greater than I ever imagined could exist, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God, who was revealing himself to me, who was in this intimate state of communion with me. And the other great regret would be every hour I had wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven. I saw that we live forever. I saw that every action has a moral content that's observed and recorded for all eternity. I saw that every time we take advantage of an opportunity to do something of value in the eyes of heaven, we will very really be rewarded for that for all eternity. And every opportunity that we let go by and don't take advantage of will be a lost opportunity for all eternity. Excuse me one moment. I saw how wrong I had been. I had lived my life up to that point, kind of looking in the rearview mirror, saying to myself, oh, if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. Or if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. When in fact, absolutely everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could be arranged, coming from the hands of this all-knowing, all-loving God, not only including those things that had caused the most suffering at the time, but especially those things that had caused the most suffering at the time. And of course, the most transformative aspect of this experience was simply coming into the full experience and awareness of God's, there's no words for this, infinitely personal love for me. Now, before I had this experience, an hour before this experience, as I said, I grew up Jewish and then I was atheist, right? It never occurred to me that God even knew my name. I mean, that would have been 10 million times greater than I could imagine or hope for. That God actually, if somebody said to God, what about that Roy Schoeman fellow, that God would have said, oh yeah, he's pretty good, he's not that great, whatever. That he knew me by name was far more than I ever hoped for. Now, in this experience, I experienced that not only did he know me by name, but he had been paying attention to me, watching over me, arranging everything that happened to me, knowing how I felt and caring about how I felt at every moment of my existence, as though I were the only creature in the universe, as though he were the most doting grandfather you could imagine, leaning over his, firstborn grandchild with his ear to the infant's lips just to hear the slightest, murmuring coming from the child. And that was by far, I mean, that absolutely changed everything. I mean, there was never any reason to be anxious about anything, right? This is God. This is God himself, not only the God who created everything that exists, but actually created existence itself, created space itself, it created time, it created matter, created the laws of the universe, created even more than that, because actually created existence. That God not only knew me by name, but was paying so much loving attention to me every moment. How could I possibly, be worried about anything, anxious about anything, scared about anything? And of course, in this experience, I saw that how foolish I had been worrying about life having no meaning or purpose. Not only do we live forever, not only are we going to be rewarded for all eternity for everything we do that's a value in the eyes of heaven. Where was I? Um, but obviously, I mean, every moment, even if we don't have the opportunity to do anything of value in the eyes of heaven, simply worshiping and loving and obeying and adoring and serving this God was an infinite depth of meaning, greater than I ever imagined could exist. So of course I knew that the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve and love and obey my Lord and God and Master, who was revealing himself to me. What I didn't know was who he was and what this religion was and what his name was and, what religion to follow. I couldn't think of this as the God of the Old Testament, of the God of Judaism. The picture of God that emerges in the Old Testament is of a God far more distant and severe and impersonal and judgmental, actually, and punishing than this God was. By the way, that's not because the Old Testament presents a false view of God. It is because the entire relationship between God and man was transformed with the coming of Jesus. Surprise, that's why he came. The Old Testament itself says, I think it's in the prophet Joel, there's a prophecy. The Lord says, the day is coming when when you won't have to go to this person and that person and say, tell me about God, but I will reveal myself to the lowliest manservant and maidservant among you. And St. Peter on the first Pentecost Sunday sermon cited that scripture prophecy and said, this day has come now. That's what we're experiencing. In other words, there's also a prophecy in the Old Testament somewhere, I don't remember, that the day is coming when the Lord has given you the commandments written on tablets of stone, but he's going to write them on your fleshly hearts. I think that's also actually quoted in one of the epistles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to know the exact citation. I'm not a Protestant, but anyway, that's what happened. I mean, God went in the old days of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, God did not speak to the ordinary person. He only spoke through the prophets and the priests. When God told Moses to go to the top of Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments, he commanded Moses build a fence around the base of the mountain to prevent any of the people from even touching the base of the mountain while I'm on top, because if they do, they'll have to be instantly killed for the sacrilege. Okay? And this is not fiction, and is not because the Jews got the story wrong. This is because the relationship between divinity and humanity was fundamentally changed with the coming of Jesus, which is why we are now able to have the most holy Trinity living in our hearts, and we're able to actually be the indwelling temple, well, the temple of the indwelling Holy Spirit. This came about because Jesus came. So of course it's not there in Judaism. Anyway, that's all another little tangent, but basically what I'm saying is there's no way that this experience I was having, I could consider part of Judaism. And that's a question I also often get, by the way. Why didn't you think this was the God of Judaism, and why didn't you stay Jewish? So anyway, I've answered that question. So anyway, I was, needless to say, totally overwhelmed and ecstatic during this experience. And I prayed to this God, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. I very literally prayed that. I obviously wasn't ready to hear it at that point. I had enough suspiciousness, let's say, about Christianity. Anyway, he respected that prayer. He did not reveal his name to me. But I went back home, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I was living at the time, because obviously that's where Harvard is. And I instantly lost all interest in teaching Harvard MBAs how to make a little more money. I saw how foolish I had been putting all my time and energy into working for things that wouldn't do me any good even 100 years later when I was rotting in the ground. If I wanted to be smart and selfish, I didn't understand from this experience it was wrong to be selfish, but what I understood was it was being stupidly selfish to care about goods in this world, because you're going to die and they're not going to do you any good at all. If you want to be smart and selfish, the only thing that makes sense is to work on your treasury in heaven, right? Your treasure in heaven. So I lost all interest in anything which wasn't going to do me any good a million years from now. I know that's selfish. It's true, though. It's not so bad to be selfish in that way. Jesus says in the Gospels at one point, he says, the children of this world are wiser in their pursuits than the children of light are. In other words, if you're going to be selfish, at least be selfish for the right things. Be selfish for things that will do you good for all eternity, which basically amounts to try to be as great a saint as possible. And if you try to be as great a saint as possible, sooner or later, God will wean you of your selfishness anyway. But anyway, so anyway, I went back home. All I wanted to do was know who this God was and how to work on my heavenly bank account. And so every night before going to sleep, I knew nothing about Christianity. I had never read an Old Testament, never mind, read a New Testament. I had never touched a New Testament. You might get cooties from it. It's kind of, I don't know, but really, as you know, as a Jew and as a Jew in the aftermath of the Holocaust, there was really a sense of taboo about that business. So I never even looked into Christianity or knew nothing about it except from Christmas carols that would play on the radio at Christmas time and stuff like that. But anyway, I want to know who this God was. So every night before I went to sleep, I said a short prayer I had made up to know the name of my Lord and God and Master who had revealed himself to me in that experience. And a year to the day after that first experience, I went to sleep. I thought I was woken by a hand gently on my shoulder. I now realize that if there had been a camera in the room, it would have shown me asleep in bed. But I thought I was awake, and it felt like I was awake. And my memory represents it as though I was awake, had been awake. So I can only describe it as I experienced it. So I thought I was woken by a hand gently on my shoulder and led to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could ever imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when I found myself in her presence, all I wanted to do was throw myself on my knees and somehow honor her appropriately. The first thing she said to me was she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. Well, as I said, when I found myself in her presence, I was just overwhelmed. I'm tempted to say by everything. I was, of course, overwhelmed by her physical beauty, but I was mostly overwhelmed by the love that flowed from her, the intensity and purity of the love that flowed from her, which was carried by her voice when she spoke. And the only way I can describe her voice is to say that it was made up out of that which makes music music. And it was actually more overwhelming than her physical beauty was the beauty of her voice. And when she spoke, this incredibly beautiful voice just flowed straight through me, carrying it with it, her love, and lifting me up to a state of perfect bliss, actually, that I never imagined could exist. So anyway, the first thing she said was she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. My first thought was, I just wanted to honor her somehow appropriately. So my first thought was, oh my goodness, I wish I at least knew the Hail Mary, but I didn't. So when she offered to answer any questions I might have for her, my first question was, see, I wanted her to teach me the Hail Mary, but I was too proud to admit I didn't know it. So instead, I asked her what her favorite prayer to her was. Her initial response was a little bit coy. It was, I love all prayers to me. But I was a little bit pushy, and I said, you must love some more than others. And she recited a prayer to me. She recited it in Portuguese, and I didn't know any Portuguese. So all I could do was make the effort to remember the first few syllables phonetically. The next morning when I woke up, I immediately wrote them down phonetically. And then later, when I met a Portuguese Catholic woman, I asked her to recite the prayers to Mary in Portuguese. And to the best of my ability, I identified it as, O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee.
Right.
I asked her about 4 or 5 other questions. Most of the questions came out of me just being overwhelmed by who she was and wanting to honor her appropriately and just being totally dazzled and I don't even know what the word is, just overwhelmed. And anyway, so I asked her about 4 or 5 other questions, which she graciously answered. And then she said she had something she wanted to speak to me about. And she spoke for another 10, 15 minutes. And then the audience was ended and I went back to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I knew it had been Christ in that first experience. I knew I wanted to be as completely and fully a Christian as possible, even though I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea of what the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant was. But I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was. I was hopelessly in love with the Blessed Virgin Mary. As a matter of fact, my first thought when I woke up that next morning was, boy, I can't wait to go to sleep again tonight and see her again. It never occurred to me that this would be a once in a lifetime experience. And that was a grace because by the time I realized it would never happen again, the memory had faded to the point where I could accept the prospect of being stuck on earth, for another 50 or 60 years before I got to see her again. But if I had known that morning, I don't know how I could have gone on, because everything in this world was so tasteless and drab and colorless and cardboard and gray compared to being in the presence of her love, that it would have been a very daunting prospect.
Mm.
Anyway, anyway, I knew I wanted to be as fully and completely a Christian as possible. I really knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was because I saw in this experience how she was the channel through which all of the grace that flows from divinity into humanity flows through the Blessed Virgin Mary. It was almost like she was a conduit or a funnel or something that connected divinity to humanity. I know that in the more fundamental sense, okay, I got to give Jesus his due, right?
Right.
Jesus is Jesus is the real, he's the real redeemer. He's the real mediator between God and man. He is the real. It's all got to do with the hypostatic union, right? That Jesus is fully God and fully man. So in one person, divinity and humanity flowed together. So for all eternity, divinity and humanity, which had been two separate qualities, let's say, are now stirred together into one pot, and we get to be in that pot. Okay. One of the church fathers, I'm drawing a blank on which one, said, God became man so that man became God. So God became man so that man could become God. Eastern Church talks about the divinization of man, okay? And that came about because of the hypostatic union. That came about largely because divinity and humanity united in Jesus and therefore will always be united. And all of our sin nature and all of our sins are not impediments because Jesus took them on. That's, of course, what Holy Week and Good Friday is all about. So I'm not a heretic, and I'm not ignorant of the fundamental Catholic truths.
Right.
Forgive me. So I'm just describing my experience. And I'm not overinterpreting my experience, but in this experience, I saw how all of the grace that God dispenses to mankind, that was earned by Jesus, is dispensed through the hands of Mary. And that's actually dogma. And in another talk, I have quote of pope after pope after pope, saint after saint after saint, that says that God has chosen, for some reason that he knows and we don't, to make Mary the channel of distribution for all of the graces that Christ earned and that are henceforth distributed to mankind. Anyway, it's really a challenge for me to talk for only an hour. So anyway, when I woke up the next morning, I knew all of that because I had seen that in the experience. I also know, and I'll mention at least one of the questions and answers, because otherwise, again, I'll be accused of being a heretic. One of the questions I asked the Blessed Virgin Mary, I was totally overwhelmed because I saw this. So I saw her glory. I saw how exalted she is. And I kind of stammered out. It was an exclamation more than a question. I said, how can it be? How is it possible? How can it be that you're so glorious, that you're so magnificent, that you're so exalted? How can it be? And her reply was just to look down on me almost with pity and shake her head gently and say, oh no, you don't understand. You don't understand anything. I'm nothing. I'm a creature. I'm a created thing. He's everything. Okay, so I'm not fundamentally confused about that stuff. But anyway, So the next morning when I woke up, I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was. I knew that it had been Christ in the earlier experience. I knew I wanted to be as fully and completely a Christian as possible. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic. All I could do was open a local phone book and find a local church to go to, which was a Protestant church. But as soon as I got to know the pastor a bit, I shyly asked him about the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when his reply did not give her the respect that I knew she deserved, I knew this is no place for me. And then the other thing that was happening after that experience of Mary was that I was spending all my free time at Marion Shrines. There was a shrine to Our Lady of La Salette in Massachusetts, about 45 minutes from where I lived. I would drive up there 4 or 5 times a day just to walk the grounds and to kind of feel her presence and commune with her. I didn't even know about prayer. I'm not even sure I knew the Hail Mary yet at that point. But anyway, I would just drive up there to kind of feel her presence. And sometimes when I was there, there'd be a mass going on. And whenever I was around a mass going on, I was filled with this tremendous urge to receive communion. And so that's what led me pretty directly into the Catholic Church, was knowing who the Blessed Virgin Mary is and wanting to receive communion daily, if at all possible. This is a little bit of a confession, and then I'm going to end my, my machine gun account here. But when I first wanted to become Catholic, I did not fundamentally know the difference between the Catholic Church and, for instance, Lutheranism or Protestantism or whatever. But I knew one thing. I knew that if I wanted to receive communion every day, I had to be baptized in the Catholic Church. That if I was baptized as a Lutheran, I could receive maybe once a week at the most, maybe twice a month, whatever. But I certainly could not receive every day. And it was the desire to receive the Eucharist every day, if possible, which made me determined to enter the Catholic Church. By now, of course, again, I'm not a heretic. Now I know that it's not even communion in, for instance, the Lutheran Church. I understand that now, but I didn't understand that then. So again, that's just a reflection that sometimes it's not so bad to be selfish or greedy or something, because God then can use that to put you on the right track also. So with that, I've been veiling your face, Jim, because I couldn't afford to be distracted by seeing your reaction.
Oh, okay. All right.
Now I've unveiled it, and you can take over again.
Well, Roy, thank you so much. First of all, it is an amazing story, and I've heard it before, but I could listen to it, forever, I think. And we do have, I want to make sure we get some of these questions now. We do have a number of questions that have come in. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see them. Okay, so I'm just going to start. I'm not filtering these, Roy, so
Okay.
I'll get them to you as they are. You said that Mary was beautiful. Do you remember what she looked like? Hair, eyes, skin, and what was she wearing?
First of all, for the last part of that question, my normal answer is I'm a guy. We never notice what women are wearing.
Uh-oh. Okay, yeah.
But anyway, it's not strictly true. Okay. I do remember what she looked like. No description and no picture, of course, can do her justice. Okay. She was wearing a veil. There were a few strands or locks of hair that curled out in front of her veil. So I could see her hair color, if you know what I mean, even though her hair was fundamentally not loose. It was,
Right.
Behind the veil. She was wearing a flowing, I don't know what to call it, a flowing robe, a flowing gown, a flowing habit. As far as I remember, the color of the veil and the habit were in the family of, yellow, gold, beige, if you know what I mean. In other words, a kind of, I don't want to say gold because that makes it sound like it was shiny or something,
Right.
but that family of colors. It wasn't like bright blue or something. And her face other than saying that, of course, she was perfectly beautiful and quite young looking, maybe 17 looking, not a fully grown woman. I mean, in other words, more like a 16, 17, maybe at most 18-year-old, but I don't even think like an 18-year-old. And white skin. I mean, in other words, perfect skin as her complexion. She didn't have any problems with her complexion. And a somewhat triangular face. In other words, a small mouth, kind of a small chin. You know what I mean? Kind of a heart-shaped or triangular face. There are a number of images that I have seen that capture that quality. The picture of the Immaculate Heart that comes from the Fatima, I guess from Sister Lucia, or at least the statue or the image that's associated with her apparition or her appearance, with her heart crowned with thorns, is a pretty good representation. The statue in Tialina, if there are any Medjugorjeistas out there, it's an image that is very associated with Medjugorje, is a good as close as you get. Her eye color, I think, was in that hard to pinpoint range where it's simultaneously a little green, a little gray, a little blue. So anyway, that's
Good.
that answer.
We got a whole bunch more here, Roy. Now here's one. Roy, have you been interviewed by Dennis Prager, a religious Jew and conservative radio talk show host, to discuss your story and books?
That can only have been asked by a non-Jew, if I can say so. I'm not gonna insult the questioner, because I actually know who the questioner is anyway.
Oh.
But I guarantee you that he does not want to touch me with a 10-foot pole. I was Jewish myself, and I can only be trouble. I can only be trouble. He cannot make fun of me and try to get me committed, because he's a nice guy and that's not his job, and he'd alienate a lot of viewers. But he certainly doesn't want me to tell his Jewish listeners that, look, I'm more Jewish than ever because I'm a follower of the Jewish Messiah. And let me tell you all the reasons why it's painfully evident that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah and wants us to follow him into the Catholic Church. He doesn't want to give his platform to me to do that. And I have tried to speak in Jewish settings. I have tried to speak to rabbis. I know what the response is.
Okay. Roy, have there been any other Jews after the Second World War who admitted that they had any similar miraculous conversion experience? And who were they, if so? So that can be, first of all, I know I read the book.
Yeah, let me duck down a second. I have it fell on the floor. How kind of you to ask. I wrote a couple of books, and one of them is nothing but a collection of Jewish to Catholic witness testimonies. Every single one is miraculous. St. Paul says, Greeks seek wisdom, but Jews require signs, signs meaning miracles. And there are 16 Jews. All of them were miracles, and a number were after World War II. I'm just looking at the back cover so I can remind myself. You have, first of all, you have the chief rabbi of Rome, Rabbi Israel Zoli, who entered the Catholic Church. Jesus appeared to him. You have Rhonda Chervin. Some of you may know of her from EWTN. Again, Jesus appeared to her, although I believe that she was looking at a painting of Jesus, and the face, he came to life in the painting. You have Rosalind Moss, who's now Mother Miriam of, Mother Miriam of the Daughters of the Eucharist or something. You don't know who she is?
I'm not familiar.
Anyway, she's got a daily radio show. She's a big EWTN personality. Her name was Rosalind Moss before she started an order. And those are all after World War II. You have David Moss, He's one of my favorite stories. That's Rosalind's brother, actually. He was a middle manager at IBM in Armonk, New York. He was in his office when he was taken up to heaven and came back down, hair standing on end, face white as a sheet. And when he came back down from heaven, he knew that Jesus was the Messiah. He couldn't speak to anybody. He just kind of stumbled out of his office into the woods behind the building. Anyway, yeah, I have about half of these are probably after World War II.
Yeah, and I've read the book. It's an excellent book. And I guess just a follow up to that, I mean, most of the stories too in that book, right, they're sort of divine sovereign encounters, right? That the Jewish people that you mentioned had. It wasn't like a gradual thing. It was pretty instantaneous, a very powerful, direct intervention into their lives. Yeah,
that's right. You see, because I described my aversion to Christianity, or to be exposed to Christianity, and that's very common. In other words, there's a sense of I better not go there. It's like dangerous territory. It's very hard to. It's a very unusual Jew who will read the New Testament just to find out what it's about. So there isn't a whole lot of normal kind of gradual ways that God can get through. He tends to have to get through with a 2x4.
Right. Roy, how did your parents react to your transformation?
They were not happy about it when they found out. My father in particular was very upset, and it caused a lot of conflict. Gradually over the years, I'm his only son. I'm one of only two children of my parents. My father couldn't hold out for long, so he gradually reestablished contact with me. Initially, he wanted no contact with me. He gradually reestablished contact, but it was always a huge sticking point. For instance, he forbade me from wearing this crucifix around my neck, around the family or in his presence and stuff like that. However, the story has a very happy ending, because I'm not going to mention exactly where I live, but I live in an area with a lot of old people and a lot of old people's homes and a lot of independent living facilities for old people. And my parents lived outside of New York City. And when they became too old to take care of themselves, I moved them down to a facility near where I live, and I took care of them. And I, had dinner with them most nights and everything. And that really melted my father's heart. And to make a long story short, about 2 weeks before he died, by the way, since this question is asked, I will say that tomorrow, the 29th of March, is the 5th anniversary of his death. Okay, so if any of you good Catholics want to throw a little bit of a mass his way, his name is Walter Schoeman. About 2 weeks before he died, Jesus appeared to him in his nursing home, essentially, when he was in bed, very late at night, when it was completely dark and there was no one there. And the next morning when I went to visit him, he was sitting up in bed, his eyes sparkling, and he just looked at me and he said, "Jesus appeared to me last night. Interesting, don't you think?" And he never said more about it than, except interesting, don't you think? But then one day when I visited him, I forgot to wear my crucifix, and he said, "Where's that thing you usually wear around your neck? You really ought to be wearing it, And he became very sympathetic to my conversion. And I was able to baptize him. It was Good Friday that year. And he died on Easter Tuesday. So very happy ending. Similarly with my mother, a little bit different. And I don't want to spend too much time with the story. She died a couple of years after my father. But again, she had a deathbed conversion. This time there was time after I baptized her to have a priest come and confirm her and give her last rites and vest her with a brown scapula and give her an apostolic blessing. And she was buried out of a sung full Tridentine Requiem Mass with all of the candles and incense and bells and everything. So God was good. And on the very last lapse, so to speak, he pulled both my parents through.
Amen. Okay, Roy, do you believe that Mary is the matrix of all graces?
First of all, nobody should care at all what I believe. What they should care about is what the church teaches as certainly true. And the church teaches as certainly true that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces. And I don't have my notes in front of me, but as I said, there are tons of papal documents that make that assertion. So even though there hasn't formally been a pronouncement of a dogma naming her mediatrix of all graces, there have been magisterial documents with dogmatic authority that have asserted that she's the mediatrix of all grace.
All right. Let's see, Roy, why do you think Our Lady said the prayer in Portuguese?
I think that I think I knew when she was saying it in Portuguese, in part because the Portuguese people had maintained a kind of old-fashioned childlike faith in Mary, devotion to Mary, more than many others. And looking back on it, I think that Fatima might have been a factor there, because the only story I had heard about the Blessed Virgin Mary in the preceding year was the story of her appearance at Fatima.
Okay. Now, Roy, can you explain how we are divine? Because therefore we can claim some divine aspect, little d, not big D.
No, we're not divine. As far as I know, we're not divine.
Right.
But what I think is the case is that when we participate in the beatific vision, in other words, when we get to heaven and finish with our purification in purgatory and are in the presence of God, we will be participating in the divine nature in a way which we cannot understand or anticipate now. But I stay away from Shirley MacLaine. We're not divine.
No.
Or maybe you are, but I'm not.
No. Roy, do you still celebrate the Jewish holidays?
I still pray the Jewish holidays, I would say. In other words, look at Passover. Passover, this is tomorrow night's talk, so I won't give it now. But Passover is all about praying for the coming of the Messiah. Passover is totally Messiah obsessed. And when you look at the Passover Seder, it is saturated with references to Christ, Jesus Christ. What happened to Jesus Christ? Only the Jews don't know it because it's somewhat veiled. I'll be talking about those, don't worry. So, of course, when these Jewish holidays come about, I pray in a very particular way that Jews receive the gift of receiving what they brought to the rest of mankind when they brought the Jewish Messiah to mankind, who's Jesus Christ, which all of the Christians and all of the Catholics know about, everyone but the Jews. So he brought Christ, they brought Christ to the entire world. And there's a tragedy and a kind of, what other word to use, about the fact that they're like the last people to get on board. And the Jewish holidays are an opportunity. It kind of, it just becomes very brightly illumined in my prayers, that situation.
And I guess it would be a follow-up. Why do you think the Jews haven't accepted Jesus as the Messiah yet? And I know you have a whole talk about that, I think.
Yeah. There are two answers, at least three answers to that. One is they haven't received the grace to. And faith is a gift. And St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, chapter 11, makes clear, he says, what then? The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened, as it is written. God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see. He says that with reference to the Jews who do not recognize Christ. He makes it very clear in Romans 11 that there is a mysterious role of divine providence in veiling the eyes of the Jews. And he also makes it very clear in Romans 11 that when the full number of the Gentiles come in, that veil will be lifted from the eyes of the Jews, and they too will enter the church. And then the church, composed of Jew and Gentile, will be ready for the second coming. So one of the answers is there is a mystery of divine providence to God not giving the Jews the grace of recognizing Christ. Another is, you could ask, why do most Muslims live and die as Muslims, and why do most Lutherans live and die as Lutherans, and why do most Southern Baptists live and die as Southern Baptists? And the truth is, most of us believe the authorities we choose to believe. And the Jewish authorities are not dumb, and they have a huge repertoire of arguments to talk Jews out of believing in Jesus. And most people, believe their local authorities. But I'll put in another political comment: don't believe CNN or BBC. But anyway, so that's really a big problem. A big problem is that people basically buy into authority. And Jews have Jews as their authorities. They have rabbis, they have their parents, they have, their teachers. And so they just, believe the arguments they're told.
Roy, do you think there's more Jews coming into that acceptance of Jesus as the Messiah?
Yeah, I think it's unprecedented. Unfortunately, most of them don't end up in the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church doesn't evangelize them. But many of the listeners probably are aware of the Messianic Jewish movement, the Jews for Jesus movement. That's all new. It didn't exist in the early 1960s. It's all from the late 60s on. In 1968, there were 2 or 3 Messianic Jewish congregations in the United States. Now there are hundreds, probably 300 or 400 or 500. In 1968, there were, I believe, only a few hundred Messianic Jews. And now there are about 500,000 Messianic Jews in the United States. This is all new. This is all in the last, whatever that makes it, 60 years, 50, 60 years. And I think it's a sign of the times. I think it is a movement of the Holy Spirit. And the unfortunate aspect is that most of them only go 1/3 of the way or half of the way, and they don't make it all the way to the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church, I shouldn't say that. Catholic Church is perfect. But some members of the Catholic Church and representatives of the Catholic Church and people in positions of authority in the Catholic Church do not want to step on the toes of the Jewish community by appearing to poach and evangelize Jews. So the Catholic Church has, slammed the gearbox into reverse in anything having to do with the evangelization of the Jews, whereas the Protestant groups, Messianic Jews and evangelicals and so forth, have no such qualms. So when the Holy Spirit works on a Jew and he decides that Jesus is open to Jesus being the Messiah, the person, with arms open to reel him in, so to speak, is unlikely to be Catholic.
So I would ask you, would you recommend any way for Catholics to evangelize?
Absolutely.
Jews?
This is what I'm doing. This is why
How
I do this.
how would we start a conversation, or where would you see that happening? Or is that
I would say that the most important thing and the easiest thing also is simply not to be embarrassed about your own faith. And you don't have to tell the Jewish person, God forbid, don't tell the Jewish person, I'm worried about your soul. I'm afraid you're going to go to hell unless you get baptized. That is not a good system. But, if you let the Jewish person know, what your relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary means to you, or why you feel, or that you feel a huge sense of peace and joy after receiving communion, or why you're not worried about a bad medical report because you know that in the end, God arranges everything for the good, and that if you have to suffer, it has salvific value. you're not talking about them, you're not telling them how they should be, but if you let them know what your faith means to you, it will um it um it will make them want what you have, basically.
Good. That's really applies to anybody we're evangelizing, but yeah. All right. So this is, I think there's a question and then there's a clarification of the question. Roy, in your encounter with the Blessed Mother, did she recall the presence of the Lord of Sanctity? And then there's a note here. In the last question, the questioner gave a correction. It should read odor of sanctity, not Lord of Sanctity. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
that makes
to you?
more sense. I do not have a memory of I don't know the nice way to put it, what she smelled like. I don't have a memory of what she smelled like. And if she did, I have smelled that. I think many of you guys out there have smelled um, the characteristic scent of roses associated with the Blessed Virgin Mary. It happens at various apparition sites, and it happens sometimes at other things too. But had I smelt it, I would have just thought it was probably rose perfume anyway.
Hmm.
I wouldn't have stopped to register it as the odor of sanctity.
Hmm. Okay, and I'll just, this is, someone asked if this is being taped, as she missed the first part. Yes, it is, and we'll be sending it out in a couple days with a thank you. It's remarkable that God revealed himself to you, and not just God, but Mary also. I don't know anyone else in the world that could attest to God revealing himself. Excuse me, hold on.
I do, by the way. There are lots and lots and lots. Most
Uh,
people just don't have, most of them don't have the vocation of talking about it, that's all.
Okay, so let me finish that. Test to God revealing himself, let alone God and Mary. Have you thought about why God and Mary chose you and what that means for your responsibility to society and the world? I think that's why you're doing the things you're doing, but go,
Yeah,
you want to answer
I
that?
don't have any responsibility to society and the world. I only have a responsibility to God. Okay, I don't think any of us have a responsibility in an ultimate sense to anybody but God. I mean, let's say you're a parent, you have a responsibility to your child, but actually your responsibility to your child is somehow flows through God. It's what God wants you to do, and it's what God has given you to do, and so forth. God forbid I should have a responsibility to improve society or to aid society, because that's one heck of a difficult and perhaps hopeless task. All I want to do is do what God wants me to do day to day, and I don't get long-term instructions. I get invitations, like this kind invitation from Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and I know I'm supposed to say yes, because or I'm afraid I'm supposed to say yes, and I don't want to get on God's bad side.
Right.
I mentioned, I don't know what word is, lightly, that I know lots of other people who have had this kind of experience. One of them is a wonderful evangelist named Marino Restrepo from Colombia. And basically, the ones I know, basically, once you have an experience like this, usually you are supposed to somehow make God real to other people by talking about your experience, I guess, is what it amounts to.
Okay, so I'm watching the time here. We have a few more, and we'll try to get through them. As Catholics, we believe we can be saved and enjoy eternal happiness in heaven with God. What about the Jewish people and other religions who live what I would call, quote, a Christ-like life? Do they enjoy the happiness of heaven also?
We're
getting into some
I'm not the Bible
deep
answer
theology
man.
here.
What?
I said we're getting into some theology here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not the Bible answer man. I know what the church teaches. And that's the reason, I don't want to say that's the reason we have the church, but we have this wonderful gift of church teaching. I know what the church teaching is. I can recite the church teaching. Maybe you can recite the church teaching. If you don't know the church teaching, it's certainly clear, at least from the documents of Vatican II, that God judges each individual on the basis of what they were in a position to know. and you have a responsibility to live up to the light that has been given to you. And if you have the grace to, to know the truth of, let's say, sexual morality, then you will be judged on the basis of whether you have lived up to that truth or not. And if you've never been given the opportunity to know that truth, then that's up to God. I can't say more than that.
Right.
But the church has lots of teaching about that. You don't need Roy Schoeman for that.
Amen. Roy, since joining the Catholic faith, have you been alienated from the Jewish community?
Amen, brother. Are you kidding? I mean, are you kidding? I mean, I don't think I have a single. All my friends were Jewish before this happened, and I don't think I have a single Jewish friend except Jewish friends who are in the Catholic Church.
After your experience, did you confide in anyone? Like if you had the two experience, was there people that you began to, someone or people that you began to confide in?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say confide. I floated trial balloons a little bit, but they tended to blow up in my face. People just thought I was nuts or something. And then like I don't think, I mean, this is a long time ago, so it's not easy for me to remember. I don't think I gave much detail. I think that I know that for instance, I called my mother as soon as I got home from that first experience and said, "Mom, I got good news. It's all true. We live forever." It never occurred to me that she wouldn't believe me because I had seen it. And there's just this silence on the phone, this awkward silence. And I realized that she doesn't believe me, So I never went very far, if you know what I mean, because I could tell that
Reaction.
it would just be a disaster.
Right. Could you describe the love of God, in parentheses, the grandfather hovering over us, in more detail? That experience you had. I mean, you'd said it was very personal. You felt, extremely.
I don't think I could. I mean, if I could describe it better, I would. I think that's about as good as I can describe it. I mean, it was as though he created the entire universe for me, and that I was the only person, but probably the only creature that he, I don't want to say on his radar, you know what I mean? That his entire being was focused on me as though I was the only person who existed. And my mental image of it, I mean, I happen to have had a very warm relationship with my grandfather, and I was his first male grandchild. And he was an old-fashioned Jew, so I hate to say it, male children counted and female children didn't count. And he kind of doted on me. And so that is the natural image which comes to mind. That's all I can say.
Okay. We're going to just take two more questions. We won't get to all of them, but maybe there's another way we can answer them, or at least some time tomorrow night. Roy, I think as follows the previous question in some ways. Can you talk more about the theater curtain metaphor, about seeing the spiritual world?
Yeah, that's somebody who's heard another version of my witness testimony, obviously. Okay, I was walking. This is probably going to, if I answer that question, maybe the last question, because I can't answer in less than 3, 4, 5 minutes. I was walking during that first experience of God, and I was still walking during the experience. What happened was I was walking, and all of a sudden, as I said, it's like the curtain between the physical world and the spiritual world disappeared. But to be more precise, it's as though the curtain between the spiritual world and the physical world became very thin veil, like very translucent. and I could still see the physical world, which is why I could still walk and I could still see the trees and the path and so forth. But I could see through the physical world into the spiritual world. And I wasn't surprised that I could see into the spiritual world. The only thing that surprised me was that I could ever have not seen this spiritual world, because it was so much more real, more concrete, more immediate, more permanent than the physical world. And I could not imagine how I could have been blind to it. And I could not imagine how I could ever again not see it. And the best image I have of what this felt like is, this has happened to me. It's happened to some of you, not all of you, I know, but I have been in actually, I've gone to a ballet, a confession, but I'm really straight anyway, never mind. But I was at the ballet once, and I'm in the audience, right? And the house lights are on and the room is brightly lit. And there is what looks like a heavy red curtain over the stage. And, you know, the room is bright and there are bright lights on the front of the curtain. And then the house lights go down and there's still bright lights on the front of the curtain. And you think it's this heavy red velvet curtain. And then they dim those front lights on the curtain and they turn on the stage lights. And all of a sudden, that curtain becomes transparent and you see through it, because it was really only some thin film, and so that curtain has become transparent and you see the dancers on the stage. It was like that. It was like the physical world had become a 90% transparent curtain because the lights behind it sort of went on. Anyway, that's not a great metaphor, but it's as good as I can get. And I could see how the causality in the physical world came from the spiritual world. I actually could see the angelic hierarchies too, but we'll save that for another day.
All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to end, Roy. There's other questions and I'll see if I can,
Okay.
we'll see if we can
let me make, because obviously there's a fair amount of interest there. Let me make a very short commercial announcement. First of all, your screens show the spelling of my name, I think Schoeman. I have a website. My first book was Salvation is from the Jews. I know that's hard to remember, but anyway, Salvation is from the Jews. That's why I'm saying remember my name and you can find everything else. I have a website. It's salvationisfromthejews.com. I have a YouTube channel. It's Salvation is from the Jews. I have hundreds of YouTubes up. They're all for free. I have, 24 hours on what is Judaism and the history of Judaism. I have series on saints and spiritualities. I have, lots of series and lots of shows. I do a daily live show, which has a chat stream. So I actually take questions. Again, that's on my YouTube channel. And I have a radio show on Radio Maria every Saturday afternoon, 3 to 4 Eastern time. And I have a couple of books. So when this Zoom call ends, if you're not sick of me, you don't have to. If you're sick of me, you never have to see me again. But if you're not sick of me and want to see more of me, it's not hard. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, I know you're all over YouTube. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Roy, for really sharing all that you shared tonight. I hope people are looking forward to tomorrow night. They can still register. If anyone hasn't registered, there's still the ability to register for tomorrow night's presentation by Roy. And with that, I think, unless you have anything else you wanted to say, Roy.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Our Lady of Perpetual Help for the invitation. I look forward to the day when I can see you as well as you seeing me, when we can meet in person. I hope that day comes soon.
Yeah, it is hard talking to hundreds of people when you can't see them, but you did a great job. And I want to thank again our pastor, Father James Gerner, and our parochial vicar, Father Kwan, for their support in this presentation. And again, we look forward to tomorrow night.
Good, me too. Thanks.
God bless.
God bless.